The folding chair cracked open so loudly that 3 conversations stopped at once. My father set it beside Baxter's stainless steel food bowl. Not near the dining table, not even at the end of it, beside the dog. "Sit there," Dad said, pointing at the chair. "Since you've decided you're too important to act like part of this family, your place is over there." The dining room smelled like turkey skin, rosemary, hot butter, and the cinnamon candles my mother lit every Thanksgiving because she said they made the house feel welcoming. That was almost funny. There were 12 proper place settings around the table. White plates with gold edges, crystal glasses my mother only used twice a year, linen napkins folded into little fans. My sister Lindsay had the chair to Dad's right. There was no chair for me. Mom came out of the kitchen carrying my plate. For one stupid second, some old reflex in me expected her to pull out another chair. Instead, she walked straight past the table and bent down beside Baxter's bowl. She put my Thanksgiving dinner on the hardwood floor. Turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce. A little river of gravy sliding toward the edge of the plate. "There," Mom said. "Maybe you can think about how you've been treating your father." Lindsay snorted into her wine. "Wow." She looked from me to Baxter. "Even the dog has more status than you." Aunt Melissa made the choking sound she always made when she was trying not to laugh at something mean. Uncle Ray stared very hard at his napkin. 2 cousins laughed because everyone else seemed to be waiting for permission. Dad leaned back in his chair. He had that look on his face. The one that said the room had just been arranged correctly. For years, that look could make the muscles between my shoulders tighten. That night, something entirely different happened. I looked down at Baxter. Baxter looked up at me. He was a 9-year-old golden retriever with arthritis, cloudy eyes, and significantly better judgment than most of the people in the room. I started laughing. Not the little social laugh I used when Lindsay insulted me, and Mom said she was only teasing. Not the tight laugh I used when Dad introduced me to clients as his overeducated daughter. I laughed hard enough that I had to put one hand against the wall. Lindsay stopped smiling. Dad's expression flattened. "Carrie." I bent down, picked up my plate. Mom's face relaxed, just slightly. She thought I was going to sit. Instead, I walked back to the table. "Caroline," Dad said. I stopped between him and Lindsay. Then I turned the plate upside down. Turkey, stuffing, potatoes, cranberry sauce, and enough gravy to drown a small country landed in the middle of my mother's white tablecloth. The gravy spread beneath the centerpiece. A piece of turkey slid against Dad's carving knife. One cranberry bounced off Lindsay's bread plate and landed beside her wine glass. Nobody moved. Then Baxter barked. I laughed even harder. "Oh, come on," I said, wiping under one eye. "You wanted my dinner away from the family." I pointed at the wreckage. "Now it's where it belongs." Lindsay stared at me. Mom whispered, "What is wrong with you?" Dad pushed his chair back so hard it struck the wall. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I looked at Baxter again. Honestly, he's still the only one here with manners. Aunt Melissa made a tiny sound that might have been a laugh before covering it with a cough. Dad heard it. That made things worse. "If you're not going to act like part of the Mercer team," he said, "don't expect family privileges." There it was. The Mercer team. Everything in my father's life eventually became a team, provided he was the coach and everybody else understood they were replaceable. I picked up the folding chair, opened it, and sat beside Baxter. Not because Dad told me to. Because suddenly, the chair seemed like the best seat in the room. Baxter rested his chin against my knee. I scratched behind his ear. "You and me, buddy." That was when I saw the folder. It sat on the credenza behind Dad's chair, half covered by a stack of holiday cards. Dark blue, silver logo. Stonebridge Residential Group. I knew the name. Anybody working around commercial construction in western Pennsylvania knew it. Stonebridge had been buying regional contractors for several years. What caught me wasn't the company name. It was the white tab protruding from the folder. I could read it from where I sat. Technical Continuity. C. Mercer. My fingers stopped moving behind Baxter's ear. C. Mercer. There were 4 Mercers in that room. Only one had a professional engineering license. Me. I looked at Dad. He was arguing with Mom about the tablecloth. Neither of them was looking at me. So I looked back at the folder. I didn't touch it. I didn't ask. And I definitely didn't let my face tell them I'd seen it. 2 years earlier, I probably would have demanded an explanation. At 26, I had finally learned that asking my father a question before I knew the answer usually meant giving him time to manufacture one. So I sat beside the dog and waited. That was why I could laugh that night. Not because I suddenly stopped caring. And not because dumping Thanksgiving dinner onto a table had magically cured 26 years of being the difficult Mercer daughter. I could laugh because my family was trying to scare a woman they no longer knew. 3 weeks earlier, the Pennsylvania board had issued my professional engineer license. I had graduated at 22, passed the FE right out of school, and spent the next 4 years working under licensed engineers at an independent structural firm in Pittsburgh. 4 years without a long break. 4 years of documenting experience, taking the ugly site assignments, staying late to learn things no one could inherit from me, and sitting for the exam the first cycle I was eligible. Dad used to tell people I was obsessed with credentials. He wasn't entirely wrong. I wanted one thing with my name on it that he could not give me, take away from me, or redefine at Thanksgiving. My P.E. was part of a larger plan. 8 months of living expenses sat in a savings account my parents had never touched. The signed offer letter from a structural firm in Philadelphia was saved in 3 places. Project Structural Engineer. Start date, January 8th. My lease paperwork for a small apartment outside Center City was almost finished. I had not told my family, not because I needed their permission, because I had spent 2 years learning exactly how much information my parents needed in order to interfere with something. The correct amount was usually none. My mistake was believing I could make the exit so clean that nobody would lose anything. No screaming. No family split. No dramatic declarations. I would finish my license, build my savings, accept another job, move across the state, and slowly stop being available. I thought preparation could make freedom painless. I was still stupid about that part. Dinner ended early. Or, technically, it dissolved. Mom took the ruined tablecloth into the laundry room while talking loudly enough for everyone to hear. I don't understand what happened to her. Lindsay took photographs of the cranberry stain before Mom stopped her. Dad disappeared into his office. I was in the kitchen rinsing Baxter's water bowl when he came back carrying a tablet. Come here. I dried my hands. No. Dad stopped. It was such a small word. You would have thought I had thrown a second dinner. I need 5 minutes. I'm leaving. It's a beam question. That made me look at him. He held the tablet out. A residential renovation drawing filled the screen. I recognized Mercer Homeworks' title block. My father had founded the company before I was born. Renovations, additions, light commercial work, adaptive reuse. They were good at what they did. Most of the time. When a project needed actual structural design, Mercer Homeworks hired outside engineering firms. That part mattered. I had never been their engineer of record. I had never sealed their permit drawings. What I had done, far too often, was answer questions. A sketch texted to me on Sunday. A photo of a cracked joist. A call that started with, "Just tell me if this looks serious." I would say whether they needed to stop work, whether a detail looked suspicious, whether it was time to call their outside engineer. Informal triage. That was the phrase I had finally started using. Dad called it helping family. Who's the engineer of record? I asked. His jaw shifted. We're not doing this tonight. Then you don't need me. I'm asking you to look at one beam. And I'm asking who owns the structural scope. Jesus, Carrie. Lindsay walked into the kitchen with her wine glass. What now? Your sister has decided 3 letters after her name means she can't answer a simple question. 2 letters, I said. P.E. Dad stared at me. I shouldn't have enjoyed correcting him. I did. Lindsay rolled her eyes. You've looked at stuff for Dad forever. Not anymore. Why? Because if Mercer Homeworks needs engineering, Mercer Homeworks can hire an engineer. Dad pushed the tablet closer. 5 minutes. I reached over. For half a second, he looked satisfied. Then I pressed the lock button. The screen went black. I handed it back. No drawings. No sketches. No quick questions. Not without a defined scope through the proper channel. His face changed. You've become unbearable since you got that license. No. I became expensive. Lindsay barked a laugh, before realizing Dad didn't find it funny. I picked up my coat. Behind him, through the doorway, I could still see the edge of that Stonebridge folder. Technical continuity. See, Mercer. I said nothing about it. That silence was mine. Dad followed me toward the mudroom. You know what your problem is? I pulled on one boot. I'm sure you'll tell me. You think because some company gave you a title, you're above the people who got you there. That irritated me more than the chair. Not enough to argue. He had paid part of my undergraduate tuition. He had also reminded me of it every time I said no to him since graduation. Both things could be true. I pulled on my second boot. Lindsay came into the mudroom while Dad returned to the dining room. She leaned against the coat hooks. You seriously dumped your plate on the table. I did. That was psychotic. Thank you. I wasn't complimenting you. I know. She folded her arms. For someone who had spent most of dinner laughing at me, she suddenly looked more interested than amused. You're going to make this difficult, aren't you? I looked at her. Make what difficult? She hesitated. Barely. But I saw it. Then she said, Dad's plans. What plans? You know. Growth. No, Lindsay, I don't. She glanced toward the hall. Then, back at me. You'll be around more after the transition anyway. My hand stopped on my coat zipper. What transition? Her expression closed. I don't know. That's just what Dad calls everything lately. That isn't what you said. Oh my God, Carrie. Not everything is an engineering deposition. She pushed past me. As she turned, the front of her coat opened. A navy lanyard hung beneath it. Silver lettering. Stonebridge Residential Group. She saw me looking and pulled the coat shut. Interesting. Good night, she said. I watched her walk away. Until that moment, I had assumed the folder might concern a project. Now I knew better. Lindsay knew something. Maybe a lot. And whatever it was, somebody expected me to be around after it happened. Mom intercepted me before I reached the front door. Of course she did. She always appeared at exits. Don't leave like this. I'm driving home. You know what I mean. She lowered her voice, the way she did when she wanted to make something sound intimate instead of controlling. Your father has worked his whole life to give you girls opportunities. I put my hand on the doorknob. Then he should be proud I have one. This attitude is exactly what I'm talking about. Dad had come up behind her. He still held the tablet. Mom continued. You humiliated him in front of the entire family. I stared at her. Then I looked toward the dining room. My folding chair was still beside Baxter's bowl. The plate was gone, but a dark spot of gravy remained on the floorboards. You put my dinner on the floor next to the dog. It was a joke. No, Mom. Jokes are funny to everyone involved. Dad hid. Are we really going to make Thanksgiving about a chair? No. I looked at the tablet in his hand. We're going to make this about work. His eyes narrowed. I spoke slowly because I wanted every word remembered correctly. Do not send me drawings. Neither of them interrupted. Do not tell clients I'm reviewing anything. Do not tell project managers to check with me. Do not describe me as engineering support for Mercer Homeworks. Dad laughed once. Sharp. You're being ridiculous. If Mercer Homeworks needs an engineer, hire one. We do hire engineers. Good. Use them. Mom pressed her lips together. Carrie, family takes care of family. There it was, the sentence I had heard my whole life. It never meant everyone took care of everyone. It meant whoever had something useful was expected to surrender it. I am your daughter, I said. I am not your engineering department. Dad took one step toward me. This is because of dinner? No, dinner just made the conversation memorable. His cheeks reddened. I opened the door. Cold November air came through immediately. Mom's voice followed me onto the porch. Then don't expect us to keep making room for you. I looked back. Past her. Past Dad. Past the candles and the damaged white tablecloth. All the way to the folding chair beside Baxter. The strangest thing happened. I felt almost peaceful. That's okay, I said. Then I left. My apartment was 32 minutes away. I drove 29 of them in silence. No music. No angry phone call to a friend. No imaginary speech where everyone at Thanksgiving suddenly understood me. I had spent too much of my life rehearsing explanations for people committed to misunderstanding them. When I got home, I took off my shoes, changed into sweatpants, and opened my laptop at the kitchen counter. The Philadelphia lease portal was still open from that morning. One last document needed confirmation. Emergency contact. I stared at the blank line. For years, I would have typed my mother's name automatically. I typed Priya Shah instead. Priya was the senior engineer who had supervised part of my early development at work, and the first person who had ever told me something I should have learned at home. If a professional boundary matters, put it in writing. I clicked save. Then I checked my savings account. 8 months. Not luxurious. Enough. Enough had become one of my favorite words. My phone vibrated twice. A text from Lindsay. You seriously embarrassed Mom. Then another. Dad says we'll talk when you calm down. I put the phone face down. Opened the refrigerator. Realized I had no Thanksgiving leftovers because mine were probably still soaking into Mom's tablecloth. That made me laugh again. I ordered Chinese food. While I waited, I opened my email. The newest message had arrived 6 minutes earlier. The sender was unfamiliar. Maya Chen, Integration Director, Stonebridge Residential Group. My body went very still. The subject line read, Mercer Homeworks Key Technical Continuity Interview. I opened it. The first paragraph was polite. The second was worse. Thank you for agreeing to support post-close technical transition. I read that sentence twice, then a third time. The message asked me to confirm my availability for a diligence discussion the following week regarding my historical technical involvement with Mercer Homeworks and anticipated post-close continuity. Anticipated. My father loved words like that. Words that sounded almost factual if nobody asked who had done the anticipating. I had never spoken to Maya Chen. I had never spoken to Stonebridge. I had never agreed to support anything after a sale I hadn't even known existed. And January 8th, I was supposed to start a new job 300 miles away. I went back to the subject line. Key technical continuity. Same phrase. Same company. Same words I had seen on the folder behind Dad while he was teaching me my place beside the dog. The doorbell rang downstairs. My food. I didn't move. For the first time that night, the chair, Lindsay's comment, Dad's tablet, the Stonebridge lanyard, and that folder stopped looking like separate things. I still didn't know exactly what my father had told them. That mattered. I wasn't going to accuse him of something I couldn't prove. I wasn't going to call Lindsay and demand an explanation. And I wasn't going to send an emotional email at 11 o'clock on Thanksgiving night. I created a reply. Read Maya's message again. Then typed one sentence. Before I confirm anything, please send me the document that says I agreed. I read it once. No accusation. No threat. No apology. Then I hit send. The Chinese food sat unopened on my kitchen counter for almost 20 minutes. Every few seconds, my eyes drifted back to the email I had sent Maya Chen. Before I confirm anything, please send me the document that says I agreed. There was satisfaction in the sentence, but not enough to make me reckless. My father had spent years turning emotional reactions into evidence against me. If I got angry, I was unstable. If I asked questions, I was difficult. If I refused a favor, I had forgotten who helped me get where I was. So, I did something he would have hated. I waited. The noodles went lukewarm. I ate half of them standing at the counter, closed the laptop, and went to bed without calling anyone in my family. Friday morning, I woke to 3 notifications. One was from Lindsay. You really contacted Stonebridge yourself? The second was from Mom. Please stop escalating things until your father has had a chance to explain. The third was from Maya Chen. That was the one I opened. Her response was careful. She said Stonebridge did not have a signed employment agreement, consulting agreement, or retention commitment from me. Mercer Homeworks Management had identified me in transaction materials as a family-affiliated structural engineering resource who had historically supported project teams and was expected to provide post-close technical continuity. Expected. That word again. Maya asked whether I would be available for a short call later that morning so Stonebridge could verify the information directly with me. At 9:45, my phone rang. Caroline? This is Carrie. Maya Chen. Thank you for making time. Her voice was calm and businesslike. No apology. No dramatic accusation. Exactly what I wanted. She explained that part of her role during integration planning was identifying people whose departure could change the cost or risk assumptions behind an acquisition. Your name came up in that context, she said. In what role? Management described you as a structural engineering resource affiliated with the Mercer family. That's not a role. There was a brief pause. No, Maya said. That's why we're speaking. I opened a blank notebook. What does Stonebridge believe I currently do for Mercer Homeworks? Historical technical support, early issue identification, coordination with outside structural consultants. Some project review. Am I listed as an employee? No. Officer? No. Consultant under contract? No. Did anyone tell you I agreed to stay after closing? Management told us they expected continuity discussions to be straightforward. A laugh almost escaped me. I swallowed it. Who is management? Robert Mercer was the primary source for that representation. There it was. Not fraud. Not a forged signature. Something much more like my father. Confidence presented as consent. Do you have anything with my signature on it? No. Anything from my email address saying I agreed? No. Then I haven't agreed. That is what I need to confirm. Maya did not sound surprised. That bothered me more than if she had. She asked about my actual history with Mercer Homeworks. The safest answer was the exact one. They use outside engineering firms when structural design is required. I've never been their engineer of record. I've never sealed permit drawings for them. Over the years, my father has occasionally sent me photos or sketches and asked whether something looked concerning enough to bring in the project engineer. Paid work? Generally, no. Formal scopes? No. Were your comments sometimes useful in deciding when to involve an outside engineer? Yes. That answer tasted worse than I expected. Because useful was the word my family had built half my childhood around. Useful meant available. Useful meant free. Useful meant mine until someone else needed it. Maya asked whether I would confirm the specific statements Stonebridge had been given about me. I'll confirm statements about me, I said. I'm not asking for access to the transaction. Understood. I can send you a limited extract from the key person diligence material. Only the section management provided concerning your role. That works. One other thing. Going forward, should we continue coordinating through Robert? No. The answer came so quickly, it surprised even me. Anything involving my professional role comes directly to me in writing. All right. New argument. No sigh about family harmony. Just all right. The call ended 11 minutes later. For the first time since Thanksgiving, my anger became useful. Not because it disappeared, because it had edges. By noon, the extract arrived. One page. Stonebridge's logo in the corner. A heading across the top. Post-close continuity key, technical resources. My name appeared halfway down. Caroline Mercer. P.E. Seeing the letters should have made me proud. Instead, it felt like finding my name on luggage I had never packed. The language beneath it was polished. Family-affiliated structural resource. Historical project support. Early technical risk identification. Coordination interface with third-party engineering providers. Expected retained technical continuity following transaction close. Nothing claimed I worked for Mercer Homeworks. Nothing said I had signed anything. Every sentence had been built with just enough space around it for my father to say he had never technically lied. Then I saw the project list. 3 names. Hawthorne Mill Lofts. Briar Ridge Addition. Westlake Medical Offices. My stomach tightened. Hawthorne Mill, I remembered. Dad had sent me photographs of cracked masonry above an opening and asked whether the crew could keep going. My response had been short. Stop work at that location and call your structural engineer. The outside firm later designed the repair. Briar Ridge was even less. A sketch had appeared in my inbox late one Sunday night. I had written back. Preliminary comment only. Load path is unclear from this sketch. Have engineer of record review before construction. Westlake made me sit straighter. I had never reviewed Westlake. I had attended one birthday dinner where Dad complained about a framing conflict, and I told him, over dessert, that it sounded like something his project engineer should look at. That was apparently historical project support now. 3 separate events. 3 different levels of involvement, flattened into one clean management narrative. I opened my archived email. Not to prove a crime. To find the line. Hawthorne Mill took less than 5 minutes. The old message was still there. So was my wording. Stop work at that location and call your structural engineer. Briar Ridge took longer. When the email appeared, I stared at the disclaimer I had typed almost automatically 4 years earlier. Preliminary comment only. At 22, before I even had the experience for a PE license, I had already understood something my father refused to learn. A question could be casual. Responsibility could not. Westlake had no email because there had been no work. Only a dinner conversation. That was the moment. The problem changed shape. My father had not been secretly using my seal. He had been using something harder to see. My availability. Every time I prevented his team from wasting a day before calling the outside engineer, every time I recognized a red flag from a photograph, every time I translated engineering language into something a superintendent could understand, I had removed friction from his business. No invoice. No job title. No line item. Just carry. Which meant Stonebridge wasn't discovering a hidden engineer inside Mercer Homeworks. They were discovering a hidden dependency outside it. By late afternoon, I had started a spreadsheet. Project. Date. What I received. What I actually said. Whether an outside engineer was involved. Whether I had performed any formal service. Whether I had been paid. It was not an attack file. It was a map of where I ended, and Mercer Homeworks began. The distinction mattered enough that I wanted someone else to challenge it before I relied on it. Priya met me Saturday afternoon at a coffee shop near our office. She had supervised some of my early work and possessed the irritating ability to make me hear the weak part of my own argument before she said a word. The limited Stonebridge page sat between us. She read it once. Then again. "What are you asking me?" Priya said. "Whether I'm overreacting. That's not an engineering question. Fine. What do I need to protect?" That got a small nod. "Better." She tapped the page. "First, don't turn this into more than it is. You are not telling me you sealed work you didn't do. No. You're not telling me your father forged your signature. No. You're not telling me permit sets went out under your license. No. Good. Keep those facts clean." Her finger moved to the phrase, historical project support. What did support mean? Sometimes a photo. Sometimes a sketch. Sometimes I told him to call the outside engineer. Were you retained? No. Scope letter? No. Invoice? No. Deliverables? Not formal ones. Priya sat back. Then that's the line. Informal conversation is one thing. Preliminary technical commentary is another. Scoped professional service is another. Engineer of record responsibility is another. Don't let your anger collapse them together just because their presentation did. I hated how relieved that made me. So what do I keep? Original messages. Original attachments. Dates. Don't edit anything. Don't write yourself a dramatic summary about what everyone intended. Record what happened. I already started a scope map. Of course you did. A smile tugged at her mouth. Send it to no one until you know why you're sending it. That was why I had come to Priya. She never mistook action for progress. Before leaving, she asked one more question. Do you want this acquisition stopped? No. The answer felt important. What do you want? My name out of anything I didn't agree to. That's much easier to defend. On Sunday morning, the Philadelphia leasing office emailed me final confirmation. My apartment was mine, beginning the first week of January. The timing felt almost obscene. One screen showed a front door that belonged to my future. Another showed a transaction built partly on the assumption that I would remain attached to my past. I signed the final lease acknowledgement. Then, I completed the remaining onboarding forms for Philadelphia. No announcement. No Instagram photograph of moving boxes. No group text. One more door quietly unlocked. At 4 that afternoon, someone knocked on my apartment door. Lindsay stood in the hallway. No wineglass this time. No smirk either. Can I come in? You're already here. That isn't an answer. I stepped aside. She walked in, glanced around as if she had not expected my apartment to look exactly the same after Thanksgiving, and dropped her purse onto a chair. You called Stonebridge behind Dad's back. They contacted me. You emailed them. Because they said I agreed to something I hadn't agreed to. She folded her arms. You could have asked Dad. I asked you what transition meant. That was different. How? Her mouth tightened. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I picked up the Stonebridge extract from the counter. What were you told about my role? Lindsay looked at the page but didn't take it. That you'd help with transition stuff. Who told you? Dad. What does transition stuff mean? I don't know. Meetings, technical handoff, maybe consulting. For how long? I don't know. How much? Carrie. Who told Stonebridge I would stay? Dad said you'd come around when you saw the package. The room seemed to sharpen. What package? She looked toward the window. Retention. Consulting. Whatever they're calling it. You knew they were putting me into the deal. I knew they wanted you around. That isn't what I asked. Lindsay finally looked at me. You always help. 4 words. Not an apology. Not a defense. Just the operating system of our entire relationship. You always help. Something in my chest settled. How much do you get if the sale closes? Her face changed. There it was. Not guilt. Calculation. What does that have to do with anything? Answer me. I'm getting promoted. To what? Vice President of Client Growth. I waited. And there's a transaction bonus, she added. How much? That's none of your business. Then my time is none of yours. She paced 2 steps toward the kitchen. You think this is all about you? No, I think that's the problem. Nobody thought my part needed to involve me. Dad built this company for us. For you. For both of us. I don't work there. You could. I don't want to. The words landed differently from every refusal I had made before. Lindsay looked at me as though wanting something else had never occurred to her. If you walk away now, Stonebridge could change the deal. Then the deal was built on something they didn't own. You're taking my promotion away from me. No. My voice stayed level. I never promised you a promotion. God, you sound like a contract. And you sound like my time was already spent. She grabbed her purse. At the door, she turned back. Dad is going to lose his mind. That's his. Mom is going to say you're tearing the family apart. That's hers. Her hand tightened around the strap. What about me? That one almost got through. Almost. Do not promise my time to anyone again. Lindsay laughed once, without humor. You really mean this? Yes. She left. By Monday morning, I had my answer ready for Stonebridge. Not a demand. Not a threat. 3 factual statements. I am not an employee, officer, owner, or retained consultant of Mercer Homeworks. I have made no commitment to provide post-close technical services. I am willing to participate in diligence solely to clarify my historical involvement in matters I personally touched. Before sending it, I read the message twice. The old version of me would have added a paragraph explaining that I did not want to hurt anybody. Another paragraph assuring them my father meant well. Maybe a sentence about how complicated families were. None of that belonged in a professional clarification. So I deleted the explanation I had almost written. Then I sent the email. Less than an hour later, my phone lit up with Dad's name. I let it ring. He called again. Then came the text. Thursday. 9 a.m. Wear the Navy suit. They need to see the Mercer team together. An agenda followed. Stonebridge Residential Group. Mercer Homeworks Acquisition Diligence. Operations. Leadership Transition. Project Delivery. Key Personnel. Technical Continuity. And beneath it, Caroline Mercer, P.E. There was something almost funny about seeing my name assigned a seat before anyone had asked whether I planned to sit in it. Another email arrived while I was still staring at the agenda. Maya Chen. Thank you for your clarification. Given the importance management has placed on continuity, Stonebridge has prepared a proposed retention structure for discussion Thursday. No obligation is implied. We would like you to review it directly. Retention. Money. Real money, presumably. Enough that Stonebridge thought losing me changed the economics of the transition. Across my kitchen table sat the Philadelphia offer I had printed weeks ago. A job I had earned without my last name meaning anything. On my phone sat an agenda for a company that had already planned a future version of me. For 2 years, I had assumed freedom would become easy once I had enough savings, enough credentials, enough distance, enough preparation. Now someone was about to put a price on staying. And for the first time, leaving my family might actually cost me more money than staying. The money bothered me all night, not because I needed it. That would have been easier. Need has clean edges. You either have enough or you don't. $108,000 was different. It was enough to make a decision feel responsible even when it moved in the wrong direction. By Wednesday evening, the retention proposal had not yet reached me, but Maya's email had given me enough to understand the shape of it. Stonebridge wanted continuity. My father wanted the sale. Lindsay wanted the title waiting for her on the other side of it. Everybody had already found a purpose for my future, except me. The Philadelphia offer letter sat inside the top drawer of my desk. I pulled it out anyway. Project Structural Engineer. January 8th. The salary was good. The work was exactly the kind I wanted. Larger rehabilitation projects, more complicated existing structures, a team with enough depth that nobody would call me at dinner and ask whether a cracked beam looked serious. Underneath the offer sat my apartment confirmation. Neither document had my father's name on it. That mattered more than the money Stonebridge might offer. My phone lit up. A message from Priya. Tomorrow? I replied. 9. A few seconds later. Answer the question asked. Don't rescue silence. I read that twice. It sounded simple. It wasn't. Silence had been my assigned emergency since childhood. If Dad forgot a contractor's name, I supplied it. If Mom told a story with the dates wrong, I corrected them softly. If Lindsay froze when someone asked about something outside her lane, I filled the gap before anyone noticed. Being useful had made me fast. Tomorrow, I needed to learn how to be slow. At 8:52 Thursday morning, I walked into the Stonebridge conference room wearing the navy suit Dad had ordered me to wear. That was the last instruction of his. I planned to follow. The room overlooked a gray Pittsburgh morning. Glass walls, long walnut table, water bottles in straight rows, a screen at one end displaying both company logos. Mercer Homeworks on the left, Stonebridge Residential Group on the right. My father stood near the screen, talking to a man I recognized from the agenda as Stonebridge's operations lead. Lindsay was arranging printed packets. Mom sat near the back with a leather notebook, although I had no idea what she planned to write in it. Eric Cole, Mercer's senior project manager, gave me a small nod. Then I saw my seat. A white name card had been placed immediately to Dad's right. Caroline Mercer, P.E. Technical Continuity. The chair beneath it was a lightweight black conference chair with folding legs. For 1 second, all I could see was Baxter's food bowl, gravy on white linen. Lindsay laughing into her wine. Your place is over there. Dad noticed where I was looking. Good, he said. You're here. Instead of answering, I picked up the name card. His mouth tightened. What are you doing? There were several empty seats near the end of the table, where people who were not part of either management team had been placed. I carried the card there. Dad followed close enough that only I could hear him. Don't make a scene. I set the card down. Then don't assign me a role I don't have. Carrie. Maya entered before he could continue. She greeted me the same way she had on the phone. Good morning. Morning. Nothing conspiratorial passed between us. No look that said she was on my side. Good. I didn't need a side. I needed a record that matched reality. Once everyone sat, the meeting began with exactly the kind of material Dad handled well. Company history. Revenue mix. Repeat clients. Regional relationships. He had built Mercer Homeworks from a 2-truck remodeling business into a respected contractor. That part was true, and watching him present it reminded me why people trusted him. He knew the names of clients from 15 years ago. He knew which superintendent had saved which job. He could explain how a neighborhood changed before anyone else in the room finished opening the demographic slide. Lindsay was good too. When discussion moved to client retention and pipeline, she spoke clearly about referral channels, digital campaigns, and the difference between leads that looked impressive online and clients who actually signed construction contracts. If the meeting had stayed there, the Mercer future would have looked exactly the way Dad had advertised it. Then Stonebridge's operations lead turned a page. Let's talk about pre-construction risk. Dad leaned back slightly. The man continued. When a field condition or early site observation raises a structural concern, what is Mercer's escalation process before pricing or work proceeds? Dad gave a reasonable first answer. Project manager identifies the condition. Work pauses if necessary. Outside engineering support is retained when the scope requires it. Then the operations lead asked, who makes the initial determination that an outside structural review is needed? Dad looked at me. It happened so naturally that I almost answered. My mouth had already opened. Then Priya's text came back to me. Don't rescue silence. Dad lifted one hand toward my end of the table. Carrie can walk you through how we handle that. Every eye shifted. My fingers rested on the closed notebook in front of me. I can explain a project I personally commented on, I said. I can't describe Mercer Homeworks' operating process. I don't work there. A pen stopped moving somewhere across the table. Dad's expression barely changed. He was too experienced to argue in front of a buyer. Of course, he said. Eric cleared his throat. We usually identify field concerns through the project manager or superintendent. If it's clearly structural, we contact the engineer associated with the project or retain one. Usually, the operations lead asked. Eric shifted a page in his packet. There have been cases where Robert got an informal second look before we made that call. From whom? Nobody said my name. They didn't have to. The next section of the meeting concerned 3 projects. Hawthorne Mill Lofts appeared first. A photograph filled the screen showing cracked masonry above a widened opening. Dad described the project history, then said, Carrie caught that issue early. Maya looked toward me. Is that accurate? Yes, with context. I opened the email archive I had brought on my laptop. My father sent me photographs. I told him to stop work at that location and contact the structural engineer. I did not design the repair. The operations lead asked, who did? Eric supplied the outside firm's name. And they issued the sealed design? Yes, Eric said. The answer seemed to relieve something in the room. Not everything was wrong. That was important. Briar Ridge came next. Dad described an early framing question. Again, my name appeared in the presentation. I read my original response aloud. Preliminary comment only. Load path is unclear from this sketch. Have engineer of record review before construction, Maya asked. Did you perform that review? No. Did Mercer retain an outside engineer? Eric confirmed that they had. Then Westlake Medical Offices appeared. Dad began explaining the framing conflict. Maya turned to me before he finished. What was your involvement here? None professionally. Dad's chair moved an inch. We discussed it. At your birthday dinner, I said. A couple people looked up. You described a field condition over dessert. I told you it sounded like something the project engineer should review. The operations lead glanced at the slide. This project is listed as another example of Miss Mercer's technical support. Dad spoke before I could. It was support. She understood the issue and helped us identify the next step. That was the clever part. He wasn't entirely wrong. I had helped. The question was, what that help meant. Did you receive a report? The operations lead asked me. No. Sketch? No. Photographs? No. Invoice? No. Written recommendation? No. He looked back at the screen. Nothing dramatic happened. Nobody accused Dad of dishonesty. Nobody announced that the sale was off. The operations lead simply drew a line through something on his paper. That small movement made my stomach tighten. During the first break, I took my coffee into the hallway. Lindsay followed. What are they doing? She asked. Due diligence. I know that. Her voice dropped. Why do they keep asking about escalation paths and engineering handoffs? Because they're buying a construction company. That's not what I mean. She checked the conference room door behind us. They asked Eric how long it takes to get outside engineering involved. Then they asked who tracks the response. Tomorrow's agenda has operational workflow all over it. I waited. Her thumb moved across her phone screen. She showed me a photograph of the next day's agenda. Field condition escalation. Outside consultant engagement. Change management. Responsibility matrix. Do I need to know all of this? she asked. There was no apology in her face. No sudden sisterly awakening. She looked scared. Not of what had happened to me. Of being asked questions her title suggested she could answer. You're being presented as next-generation leadership, I said. I'm in sales. Then say that. Dad expects me to know the business. You should know you're part of it. What if they ask me something technical? Tell them it's outside your scope. She stared at me. That's it? That's what I do. Her phone remained between us. For years, Lindsay had watched me make expertise look effortless because she had never seen the boundaries underneath it. Can you just go through tomorrow's agenda with me tonight? There it was. The old reflex reached for the request before my brain did. A few hours. Maybe less. I could explain enough to keep her from embarrassing herself. Then nothing would change. No. Her eyes narrowed. You're seriously going to let me walk into that room unprepared? You took a picture of the agenda. Prepare. You know what I mean. Yes. The conference room door opened behind us. Maya stepped into the hallway. We're ready to continue. Lindsay locked her phone. As she walked back inside, she said under her breath, You're enjoying this. I looked at the coffee in my hand. I wasn't. That almost made it harder. The afternoon session began with a document placed in front of me. Stonebridge's Integration Council introduced it carefully. This is a draft only. Nothing here is binding unless both sides choose to proceed. I read the first page. 18 months. Part-time technical transition consulting. Guaranteed fee totaling $108,000. Project-specific work billed separately. Any engagement subject to conflict approval from my primary employer. The number looked even larger in black ink. At 26, $108,000 for part-time transition work was not symbolic money. It was a down payment, years of rent, a larger emergency fund, a way to arrive in Philadelphia already ahead. Dad leaned toward me. See? The room was quiet enough that everyone heard him. They value you. I looked at the number again. Something about the sentence made me want to laugh. The Thanksgiving chair had cost nothing. So had every Sunday sketch. Every photograph. Every quick question. Apparently my value had existed all along. It had simply required a buyer to put a price on it before my father could see it. Maya asked, Would you like time to review the proposal? Yes. Dad turned. You know this is more than fair. I said I'll review it. That should take about 30 seconds. It'll take longer than that. His fingers tapped once against the table. I closed the agreement. That was my choice for the moment. Not yes. Not no. Mine. The meeting broke again before the final integration discussion. Dad caught me near the windows. Mom and Lindsay joined us a few seconds later. You'd be insane to turn that down, Dad said. Maybe. This is what you've been demanding for years. Professional respect, proper compensation. From Stonebridge. His face tightened. What difference does that make? Mom stepped closer. Carrie, can we please not turn everything into a fight? This is a chance for all of us to win together. All of us. The phrase had always arrived immediately before somebody assigned me the expensive part. Lindsay crossed her arms. My package can change if the transition model changes. Dad glanced at her. She continued anyway. They were clear about that. So this is my promotion now? I asked. I didn't say that. You just told me your package changes if I leave. Because they thought you were staying. Why? She had no answer that belonged to her. Dad did. Because you're a Mercer. That was it. The whole argument reduced to 4 words. Not an employment contract. Not consent. A surname. For 2 years, I had treated Philadelphia like classified information. Every interview call taken away from home. Every document stored privately. Every dollar moved into savings before anyone could discover I had enough to leave. Keeping it secret had protected the plan. Now secrecy was protecting my father's version of me. That made the decision surprisingly easy. I start in Philadelphia on January 8th. Nobody spoke. Dad's eyes narrowed first. What? I accepted another position. When? Several weeks ago. Mom pressed a hand to the edge of the table. You accepted a job in another city and didn't tell us? Yes. Lindsay's arms dropped. You're moving? Yes. Dad looked toward the conference room. then back at me. You're not going to Philadelphia. The sentence was so absurd that I nearly missed how familiar it sounded. At 12, it had been, you're not quitting piano. At 17, you're not applying that far away. At 22, you're not taking that firm when you could work with us. At 26, the words finally had no machinery behind them. My start date is January 8th. You have responsibilities here. No, you have expectations here. Mom lowered her voice. You planned all this while pretending everything was normal? Nothing was normal. That's not fair. My hand rested on the retention agreement. Neither was putting me into an acquisition plan without asking. Dad pointed at the document. You have a 6-figure offer sitting under your hand because I included you. There it was again. Even the consequence of his assumption had become a gift from him. I'll review Stonebridge's offer, I said. I'm not reviewing your ownership of my future. The conference room door opened. Maya asked if we were ready. Dad answered for everyone. Yes. This time, I didn't correct him. The final session lasted less than an hour. Stonebridge's chief financial officer joined by video. Maya summarized what had been clarified during the day. Mercer Homeworks had valid outside engineering support on projects requiring sealed structural design. That was not the issue. The issue was cost and management process. How much early technical triage had been happening informally? How often did project teams wait for Robert to check something before retaining outside help? What would the company's operating model look like when that informal access disappeared? Dad pushed back. Reasonably at first. He explained that contractors use judgment every day. Not every concern required a formal consultant. Experienced builders knew when to escalate. The operations lead agreed. Then he asked, who carries that judgment forward after you transition out? Dad looked toward Lindsay. She shifted in her chair. Then his gaze moved to me. Carrie can help from Philadelphia. Nobody interrupted him. Neither did I. Maya turned toward my end of the table. Caroline? No commitment has been made. Dad's chair creaked. The Stonebridge chief financial officer spoke through the screen. Then we need to separate that assumption from the transaction model. A strange pressure left my shoulders. Not because my family had lost. They hadn't. Stonebridge still wanted the company. The conversation that followed was almost aggressively practical. They would rerun technical diligence without assuming my availability. Budget a more formal outside engineering arrangement. Test management depth separately from the Mercer family structure. And review Lindsay's proposed post-close responsibilities based on what she actually handled today, not simply the succession language in the presentation. Nobody used the word punishment. Nobody needed to. For the first time, the cost of my absence was becoming an ordinary business expense instead of a moral failure. Dad tried once more. Carrie has always been available when the company needs her. Maya looked at me. I left the sentence where he had put it. No commitment has been made, I repeated. The operations lead closed his packet. One more change for tomorrow. Lindsay looked up. We'd like you to lead the operational review. Her face lost some color. He continued. Client pipeline, field escalation, consultant engagement, change management, Mr. Mercer can provide historical context, but we want to understand the next generation's actual operating depth. Then he turned toward me. Caroline, you're welcome to remain in the room, but please answer only questions concerning work you personally performed. Understood. Across the table, Dad was looking at me. It was the same look he had given me in the kitchen when he held out the tablet. Carrie, 5 minutes. 1 beam. 1 answer. Fill the gap. Keep the room moving. Save everyone the embarrassment. Beside him, Lindsay slowly turned tomorrow's agenda face down. For the first time in my life, the Mercer future was going to have to stand in front of a room without me behind the curtain. The next morning, Lindsay was already standing at the front of the conference room when I arrived. She had changed suits. Yesterday she had worn cream, soft and expensive, the kind of outfit that photographed well beside my father. Today she wore charcoal. There were 3 legal pads in front of her, 2 printed agendas, and a cup of coffee she had apparently forgotten to drink. My seat was still at the far end of the table, exactly where I had left it. That helped. Stonebridge's operations lead came in with their risk manager and an estimator I hadn't met the day before. Maya followed them, carrying a thinner binder than yesterday. Dad took his usual seat. Lindsay stayed standing. For the first 20 minutes, she was good. Really good. She explained Mercer Homeworks' client pipeline without hiding behind jargon. She knew which referral sources converted. She knew which architects sent repeat work, which homeowners consumed hours of estimating time and never signed, and which commercial clients looked small on paper but generated renovation work every 18 months. Stonebridge's estimator asked how Mercer tracked lost bids. Lindsay answered without looking at Dad. The risk manager asked how long an average lead stayed active. She had the number. For a moment, watching her, I could see exactly why Dad had spent years telling people she was the future. Then the screen changed. A simple flowchart appeared. Field condition identified. Assess. Escalate. Price. Authorize. In Acument, the operations lead rested his hands on the table. Let's use a common example. Framing is open during renovation, and the field condition doesn't match the drawings. Who decides whether work continues, pauses, or goes to an outside engineer? Lindsay glanced at the screen. The project manager would assess it. And then, if it's structural, we get engineering involved. Who decides that threshold? The project manager. Eric shifted in his chair. The operations lead looked at him. Always. Eric said. Not always. Dad leaned forward. It depends on the condition. There's judgment involved. Of course, the operations lead said. Whose judgment? Dad answered first. Mine, ultimately. The risk manager made a note. What happens post-close when you're not immediately available? Dad looked toward Lindsay. She swallowed. We'll formalize the process. How? Another pause. Through operations. The estimator asked. Who owns operations in the proposed structure? Dad said. Lindsay will be part of that leadership team. Lindsay looked down at her agenda. The operations lead waited. Nobody spoke. My father turned his head. Carrie? There it was. One word. For years, one word had been enough. Carrie? Translate this. Carrie? Check this. Carrie? Tell them what I mean. The room held still long enough for the air system above us to become noticeable. A faint hiss. Paper shifting. The click of somebody's pen. My sister looked at me. Her face had gone red along the cheekbones. Every instinct I had developed as her older sister reached toward the empty space. Explain escalation. Describe a reasonable process. Give them something competent enough to move forward. 5 sentences, maybe 6. I could have saved her in under a minute. My hands stayed folded on my notebook. Dad said my name again. Carrie. That's an operating question, I said. Lindsay is presenting operations. His mouth hardened. Lindsay stared at the flowchart. The operations lead didn't rescue her either. Finally, she said. Then the honest answer is that I haven't owned that process. Dad interrupted. She's been exposed to every part of the company. I didn't say I haven't been exposed to it, Lindsay said. It was the first time I could remember hearing her correct him in a room that mattered to him. She looked at the Stonebridge team. My work has been sales, client relationships, branding, and pipeline development. I know how project delivery affects clients, but I haven't managed structural escalation or outside engineering coordination. The risk manager nodded once. Not approving. Not condemning. Just recording reality. Dad tapped his finger against the table. We're making this sound more complicated than it is. Caroline has always handled structural issues for us. My head came up. Maya turned toward me. Is that accurate? The room had finally reached the sentence my father had been building toward since Thanksgiving. It would have been easy to punish him with it. That wasn't what I wanted. Not as stated, I said. Dad leaned back. I continued. I answered questions from time to time because he's my father. Sometimes that meant looking at a photograph and saying, "Stop work and call the project engineer." Sometimes it meant telling him a sketch wasn't enough to answer the question. The risk manager asked, "Were you ever responsible for Mercer Homeworks' structural process?" No. Employee? No. Consultant under a standing agreement? No. Engineer of record? No. Did you seal Mercer Homeworks' permit documents? No. Dad made a frustrated sound. But she was available. That's the point. The operations lead looked at him. How did project teams know when she was available? They asked me. And how did you document her review? It wasn't that formal. That answer changed the room. Not dramatically. No one gasped. The estimator simply looked at the risk manager. The risk manager wrote something. Eric rubbed his thumb along the edge of his legal pad. Maya asked him, Eric, from a project management perspective, how did this work? Eric looked at Dad before answering. We used outside engineers when design or sealed work was required. We established that yesterday, Maya said. I'm asking about the earlier step. Eric took a breath. There were times when a superintendent called Robert with a question. Robert would tell us to hold for a bit because he wanted to check something. With whom? Sometimes Carrie. How did you know? He'd say he was checking with her. The operations lead asked, did you wait before contacting the outside engineer? Sometimes. How long? Usually not long. That wasn't my question. Eric glanced at his notes. Sometimes an hour. Sometimes until the next morning. Dad pushed back immediately. We're talking about normal contractor judgment. Nobody sat around for days, waiting on my daughter. The operations lead nodded. That distinction matters. We're not treating this as a permitting defect. We're looking at whether the operating model includes an informal decision point that disappears after closing. Exactly. There was nothing illegal hiding under the table. There didn't need to be. A load could be real even when nobody had bothered to put it on the drawing. The next question went back to Lindsay. How would you replace that decision point? She looked at Eric. Then at Dad. Then at the flowchart. Finally, she said, I wouldn't replace Carrie with myself. Dad's chair creaked. Lindsay continued. We define conditions that require immediate escalation, give project managers authority to engage the outside engineer, and stop routing everything through Dad. The operations lead asked, can you build that process? With Eric and whoever owns operations after close. Yes. Would you personally approve technical decisions? No. Dad cut in. She's underselling herself. Lindsay's fingers tightened around her pen. I'm telling them what I actually do. That sentence hit me harder than I expected. Not because it erased anything. Thanksgiving still existed. So did every time she had laughed when Dad called me difficult for refusing work she never had to do. But for the first time, she was sitting in the chair she had always wanted, without asking me to stand behind it and hold it steady. Stonebridge called a break 20 minutes later. Maya and the operations team took the smaller conference room across the hall. Dad waited until their door closed. Then he turned on me. You could have answered one question. I could have. Instead, you sat there. Yes. You enjoyed watching your sister struggle. Lindsay looked at him. I answered. Dad ignored her. You think this proves something? It proved exactly what they were testing. His palm landed flat against the table. Do you understand how many employees depend on this transaction going through? There was the second lever. If money didn't work, mortgages would. People with kids. People who had nothing to do with Thanksgiving. For a moment, guilt landed exactly where he intended it to. I knew some of those employees. Had known a few since I was a teenager. Men and women who had watched Lindsay and me grow up. People who deserved stable jobs. But protecting them did not require pretending Mercer Homeworks had resources it didn't have. If the company needs me to exist in order to protect their jobs, I said, Stonebridge needs to know that before they buy it. Dad stared at me. That is not what I said. No, it's what the argument means. Lindsay sat down. Dad turned toward her. You should have let me answer those operations questions. Her expression tightened. They asked me. You're supposed to show leadership. That's what I did. By telling them what you don't know. Yes. The answer came quietly. He looked away first. When Stonebridge returned, Maya had a new packet. Not a final contract. A revised transaction framework. The chief financial officer joined by video again. He spoke carefully. Nothing we're discussing today is binding. But, based on diligence, we need to adjust the model before moving forward. Dad's posture changed by half an inch. That was all. The chief financial officer continued. Stonebridge still wanted Mercer Homeworks. The business had real value. The customer base was strong. The project managers were experienced. The outside engineering relationships were legitimate. Then came the changes. The upfront purchase component would be reduced. Not by half, not by some theatrical amount designed to humiliate anyone. The preliminary range was roughly 12 to 15% below the earlier expectation. A larger portion would move into an earnout tied to performance after closing. Dad would remain for a 12-month transition instead of stepping away quickly. Mercer Homeworks would formalize an outside structural engineering agreement rather than relying on project-by-project calls plus informal family access. Lindsay's proposed role would be narrowed to client growth and business development until Stonebridge had a clearer picture of her operating experience. My name would be removed from the base case continuity assumption. Dad listened without interrupting. When the CFO finished, he said, "You're discounting a company over a misunderstanding." The operations lead answered, "We're repricing process and management risk based on information we didn't have before diligence. Carrie has been helping this company for years." "Yes," Maya said. "That is part of what changed our view." Dad looked at me as if the sentence should have embarrassed me. It didn't. He had spent years using my availability as proof that his system worked. Now the same fact had acquired a price. After the meeting, Maya asked me to stay behind. Dad did too. "This involves me," Maya said. "This discussion is about Caroline's proposed consulting arrangement." He didn't move. I picked up my bag. "It's fine." Not because he had a right to stay. Because I wanted him to hear the answer once. Stonebridge had revised the retention proposal, but the number remained the same. $108,000 guaranteed over 18 months, subject to conflict clearance with my Philadelphia employer. Additional project work at an agreed hourly rate. Remote participation where possible. Limited travel. Defined scope. It was a good offer. That mattered. If it had been insulting, refusing would have cost nothing. The total sat near the top of the page. $108,000. My student loan balance was a fraction of that. A chunk could have gone toward a future down payment. Another chunk could have turned 8 months of reserves into something closer to 2 years. Freedom with better furniture. Freedom with a softer landing. Dad folded his arms. "You'd walk away from that to make a point," Maya said. "She doesn't have to decide in this room." "I do," I said. Maya looked at me. The paper felt heavier than 4 pages should. 2 years. That was how long I had spent creating a life where nobody could call and make their urgency my obligation. Taking the contract would not necessarily be a professional mistake. The scope was defined. The money was real. Stonebridge had done exactly what I wished my father had done years ago. They asked. They priced the work. They put boundaries in writing. And I still didn't want it. That realization was almost painful. Because preparation had never been about making myself expensive enough. It had been about becoming free enough to choose something even when the alternative paid more. I slid the proposal back across the table. "Thank you. I'm declining." Dad laughed under his breath. "Unbelievable." Maya asked. "May I ask whether there's a term we could change?" "No." "Compensation?" "No." "Hours?" "No," Dad said. "Then what exactly do you want?" I turned toward him. "A life that doesn't require me to be available whenever you need me." His face went still. "I spent 2 years building that," I said. "I'm not selling it back." Maya closed the folder. "All right." Dad shook his head. "This is childish." "No." I picked up my bag. Stonebridge asked. I answered. Then I looked at Maya. "You can buy their company. You cannot buy my future." She gave a small nod and put the proposal away. That was it. No applause. No triumphant music. Just $108,000 disappearing into a folder because I had said no. Outside the building, Dad caught up with me near the parking garage elevators. Mom was waiting with Lindsay. I had not known she was coming. The moment she saw us, Diane walked toward me. "What happened?" Dad answered. "Your daughter just cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars." "Our daughter," Mom corrected automatically. It might have been funny on another day. Dad kept going. "She refused the retention agreement. Stonebridge cut the price. Now I have to stay another year." Mom looked at me. "Why would you do that?" "Stonebridge changed the transaction because of what diligence showed. People work there, Carrie." "I know. They have mortgages." "I know. Children." Yes. Her voice dropped. Do you care what happens to anyone besides yourself? That one hurt. Probably because some part of me still wanted to be the kind of person nobody could accuse of selfishness. But being impossible to accuse had turned out to be a very expensive goal. Stonebridge is still buying the company. Mom blinked. The jobs aren't disappearing because Mercer Homeworks has to pay for engineering support. It should have been budgeting properly anyway. Dad pointed at me. You did this because you were embarrassed at Thanksgiving. No. His hand dropped. Thanksgiving is when you found out I'd stopped pretending this was normal. Mom looked between us. This can still be fixed. That sentence used to terrify me. Fixed usually meant I returned to my assigned position and everyone agreed never to discuss how I had gotten there. There's nothing to fix. Dad laughed without humor. Then don't come back when Philadelphia doesn't work out. I adjusted my bag on my shoulder. I won't. Mom flinched slightly. I almost softened it. Almost added, I didn't mean that. Almost told her of course I would call. Then I remembered Baxter's bowl, the tablet, the name card, the $108,000. Silence was no longer an emergency I had to fill. My name, my license, my time, and my future are no longer part of Mercer Homeworks, I said. Don't represent otherwise. Then I walked to my car. The drive home felt strangely ordinary. Traffic near the tunnel. A grocery truck blocking the right lane. My gas light came on 2 miles from my apartment. Apparently, liberation still required gasoline. I stopped at a station. Bought coffee that tasted like burnt cardboard. Checked my bank account while the pump ran. The same 8 months of savings were there. No extra 108,000. For a few seconds, that number hurt more than I wanted to admit. There was the price, not theoretical anymore. Freedom had finally sent an invoice. I paid it. When I reached my apartment, a stack of flattened moving boxes leaned against the wall where I had left them that morning. I opened one. Started with books. Engineering texts first. Then kitchen things. One shelf at a time. At 8:17, somebody knocked. Through the peephole, Lindsay stood in the hallway. She was holding a folder against her chest. When I opened the door, she didn't come in immediately. Her hair was pulled into a loose knot. No careful client-facing makeup. No Stonebridge lanyard. What happened? I asked. She held out the folder. Dad wants me to sign this. I took it but didn't open it. What is it? My revised role description. And? Her eyes dropped to the pages. He says I need to prove we still have technical continuity. My fingers tightened around the folder. What does that mean? He wants me to accept responsibility for coordinating things I don't know how to coordinate. You have project managers. He says Stonebridge needs to see leadership. That isn't the same thing. I know. The answer came quickly. She looked at me. For the first time since Thanksgiving, there was no accusation in her face. Only fear. He wants me to sign that I can oversee things I don't know how to oversee. Behind me, an open moving box sat on the floor. Philadelphia, on one side of the doorway. Mercer Homeworks on the other. The old version of me would already have taken the papers to the kitchen table. Already started reading. Already begun solving. Lindsay held the folder toward me. Tell me what to do. Tell me what to do. Lindsay held the folder toward me. For most of our lives, that sentence would have activated something automatic. Take the problem. Read it faster. Find the weak point. Hand it back repaired. My apartment was half-packed around us. 2 open boxes sat beside the couch. A roll of packing tape rested on the floor. The Philadelphia lease confirmation was clipped beneath a magnet on my refrigerator. I looked at the folder, then at my sister. No. Her eyebrows lifted. What? I'm not reading it for you. You're the one who understands this stuff. I understand my stuff. Carrie, please. Sit down. She did. Not gracefully. The folder landed on my kitchen table harder than necessary. For the next few minutes, neither of us touched it. Then I slid a yellow highlighter across the table. Read it. You could read it in half the time. Probably. That isn't helpful. It's the only kind of help I'm offering. She stared at me. Thanksgiving sat between us, whether either of us mentioned it or not. Finally, she opened the document. The first page described her revised position after Stonebridge closed the transaction. Vice President, Client Growth. That part made sense. The next section included responsibilities for operational continuity, consultant coordination, project risk escalation, and management oversight during Dad's transition period. Lindsay stopped at the phrase technical resource coordination. What does that mean? What do you think it means? She gave me an irritated look. I don't know. Highlight it. She did. A few paragraphs later, she highlighted another line. Then, another. By the fourth yellow mark, she stopped looking annoyed. You knew this was bad. No. You knew I wouldn't understand it. I knew you came here because you didn't understand it. She read another page. This says I certify that I'm prepared to assume the listed responsibilities. What responsibilities do you understand well enough to assume? Sales, client relationships, business development, marketing. Anything else? She looked back at the yellow marks. Not this. Then that's useful information. What am I supposed to say to Dad? That isn't the first question. She put the highlighter down. What is? Do you understand the responsibility? No. Are you trained for it? Not all of it. Would you sign that page if Dad weren't in the room? She looked at me for a long time. No. There was the answer. Not mine. Hers. Lindsay leaned back and rubbed both hands over her face. He's going to say I embarrassed him. Probably. He'll say I'm proving Stonebridge right. Maybe. He'll say you got into my head. That one sounds likely. Her hands dropped. You don't care? I care. I'm just not making your decision. She gave a short, exhausted laugh. That must be nice. What? Getting to be done. The sentence irritated me before I understood why. I'm not done because someone dismissed me from the job. Her gaze moved around the boxes. No. You planned all this. Yes. For how long? 2 years. That answer landed harder than the details would have. You knew? I knew I needed an exit. From us? From being available by default. She looked at the document again. For a moment, her face reminded me of mine 4 years earlier, holding my first real set of project responsibilities and understanding that signing my name meant accepting a load no one else could carry for me. Except Lindsay was learning that lesson at home. I laughed at you, she said. There it was. No excuse attached yet. At Thanksgiving. I remember. I thought you were making everything difficult because you wanted Dad to admit you were smarter than me. I never needed him to admit that. She winced. That sounded awful. It was a little awful. A weak smile appeared and vanished. I'm sorry. I believed she was sorry in that moment. That did not erase anything. Okay. Her eyebrows drew together. That's it? That's what I have tonight. She nodded slowly. Then she pulled the document closer and began writing notes in the margin. The next morning, Lindsay copied me on an email she sent to Stonebridge. Not Dad. Not Mom. Stonebridge. She accepted the client growth responsibilities. She declined to certify readiness for technical or operations oversight outside her experience and requested that those duties remain with qualified operations personnel and retained consultants. 3 paragraphs. No accusation. No mention of me. At the bottom, one sentence stood out. I am prepared to be accountable for the work I actually know how to perform. I read it twice, then archived the message. A few weeks later, Mercer Homeworks sold. I knew, because Maya sent me a short professional note confirming the transaction had closed and thanking me for clarifying my role during diligence. The revised structure looked almost exactly like the one discussed in the conference room. Stonebridge paid less upfront than Dad had originally expected. A meaningful amount less. Not ruinous. Mercer Homeworks remained valuable, and Dad still walked away with a successful transaction. He just didn't get the version where every optimistic assumption survived inspection. Part of the price moved into an earnout, tied to post-close performance. Dad stayed for a full year of transition. An outside structural engineering firm signed a standing agreement with the company. Lindsay took the client growth position. Eric remained in project operations. Most employees stayed. Nobody's mortgage vanished because I moved to Philadelphia. That mattered to me. The company had not needed a daughter. It had needed a budget. For years, Dad had solved one of those problems by pretending it was the other. Mom began rewriting the story almost immediately. Her first message arrived 3 days after closing. Your father still can't believe you chose strangers over your own family. I deleted it. The next one came 2 days later. Someday you'll understand how much damage pride can do. That one stayed unanswered too. Aunt Melissa called the following Sunday. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I remembered her tiny cough laugh after I dumped my dinner onto the Thanksgiving table and answered. Hey, Aunt Melissa. Carrie, honey. The word honey was usually a warning. I don't want to get in the middle of anything. Then don't. She paused. Well, your mother says your father lost a fortune because you got upset over that chair joke. There it was. A whole acquisition reduced to a folding chair. Mercer Homeworks sold. I know, but she said the price was cut. It was repriced after diligence. Because you wouldn't help? Because Stonebridge originally believed my future labor was part of the deal. Another pause. Your dad said you'd always helped before. I had. So what changed? For once, the question did not make me feel defensive. I stopped giving them something they never had the right to sell. She was quiet long enough that I could hear television noise behind her. So you didn't tank the sale? The company sold. Did you refuse some kind of contract? Yes. Why? Because I didn't want the job. That seemed to confuse her more than any technical explanation could have. Eventually, she said, well, your mother is telling it differently. She can. You're not going to correct everyone? No. The word felt good, not powerful, light. Later that night, when another cousin texted asking whether I had really blown up Dad's retirement over Thanksgiving, I sent one sentence. The company sold. I simply did not sell my labor with it. Then I stopped answering. Freedom, apparently included, allowing people to be wrong about me. That part took practice. A week before my move, Dad asked to meet. Not at the house. A coffee shop near Mercer Homeworks. Neutral ground, maybe. Or simply a place where neither of us could point to a chair and call it mine. He was already seated when I arrived. 2 coffees sat on the table. Mine had cream, no sugar. He remembered. That made the conversation harder than if he hadn't. I sat down. Dad slid 1 cup toward me. Stonebridge says the consulting offer remains open. Of course. Okay. They'd pay project rates on top of the base arrangement. I know. You could do most of it remotely. No. He exhaled through his nose. You haven't even let me finish. I've read the offer. This stubbornness is going to cost you a lot of money over your lifetime. Maybe. You think Philadelphia is going to care about you more than your own people do? I'm going there to work. That isn't an answer. It's the only answer I have. He turned his coffee cup slowly between both palms. I built Mercer Homeworks so you girls would have something. You built a good company. The acknowledgement seemed to surprise him. That's not sarcasm, I said. You did. Then why were you so determined to make me look incompetent in front of Stonebridge? I wasn't. You sat there while they tore apart our processes. They asked questions. And you could have answered them. Yes. That was the point he still couldn't get past. Possibility had become obligation so many times that he no longer heard the difference. You wanted me to fail. No. Then what did you want? The question came out sharper than the rest. I looked at him. There were easier answers. Respect. An apology. An acknowledgement that Thanksgiving had been disgusting. All of those were true. None was the deepest answer anymore. I wanted my no to mean no before it cost you money. He stopped moving the cup. That's what you still don't understand. I understand plenty. No, Dad. You respected the boundary after Stonebridge repriced the deal. Before that, it was an attitude problem. His eyes dropped briefly toward the table. I gave you opportunities. Yes. I paid part of your tuition. Yes. You used contacts I introduced you to. Some of them. Then don't act like you did all of this alone. I never said I did. He leaned back. That answer seemed to take some force out of whatever argument he had prepared. Gratitude was another thing my parents had always treated like a lifetime contract. I could be grateful. I could even love what he had given me. Neither created ownership. Dad looked out the window toward the parking lot. Lindsay embarrassed me. She told Stonebridge what she actually knew. She made herself look weak. She made herself accurate. His mouth tightened. You two have really decided you're above all this. No. I took a sip of coffee, then asked the question I had been carrying since the conference room. If I never work another hour for Mercer Homeworks, what do you want from me as your daughter? He looked at me. The espresso machine hissed behind the counter. Someone laughed near the door. A spoon struck ceramic. Dad opened his mouth, closed it, then said, "That's not a fair question." It was the closest thing to an answer I was going to get. I set my coffee down. I'm going low contact for a while. His face hardened again. So, this is punishment. No, this is space. How long? I don't know. What are the rules? The word rules almost made me smile. No work requests through Mom. No drawings. No speaking for me to clients, relatives, or Stonebridge. No assuming I'm available because we share a last name. And if I just want to call you? Then call me as my father. He looked back toward the window. I stood. Carrie. My hand stopped on the back of the chair. What? He took several seconds. Drive safe. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't enough to rebuild anything. But it was the first thing he had said to me in weeks that did not contain a job. Thanks. Then I left. Philadelphia was smaller than I had imagined, and louder than my old apartment. The radiator clicked all night. The upstairs neighbor apparently owned either 3 bowling balls or 1 extremely energetic cat. My kitchen had exactly 1 usable drawer. I loved it. On my first morning at the new firm, someone handed me a drawing set before 9. My name sat in the title block. Caroline Mercer, P.E. Nothing underneath it connected me to Dad. No family-affiliated resource. No daughter. No transition. Just the responsibility I had agreed to accept. One of the senior engineers stopped beside my desk. When you get a chance, take a look at the existing framing on sheet 12. I want your opinion before we proceed. When do you need it? Tomorrow afternoon. Not now. Not 5 minutes. Not because we're family. Tomorrow afternoon. I'll have it to you by lunch. Great. He walked away. For some reason, that tiny exchange nearly undid me more than the closing email had. Priya called that evening. So what? Does Freedom have decent coffee? No. That's unfortunate. The work's good. That sounds more useful. We talked for 10 minutes. Not about Dad. Not about Stonebridge. About my first project. About the apartment. About which grocery store didn't require a 20-minute parking strategy. A life could apparently become yours without fireworks. Mostly it happened through ordinary Tuesdays. Lindsay and I did not become close overnight. For months, our messages were cautious. She sent one photo when Mercer Homeworks launched its formal engineering consultant process. No caption. I replied with a thumbs up. Later she called to tell me Stonebridge had kept her in client growth after the first quarterly review. That's what I'm good at, she said. Then do that. A pause followed. I'm still sorry about Thanksgiving. I know. I was awful. Yes. She laughed once. I walked into that. You did. Another pause. Are we okay? Not yet. She accepted that. That mattered more than the apology. By the following Thanksgiving, my apartment was too small for everyone I had invited. Priya came. 2 coworkers came. A neighbor brought pie. Someone brought a yellow Labrador named Moose, who discovered the turkey smell approximately 4 seconds after entering my kitchen. We had 7 people and 6 dining chairs. My coworker Ben disappeared into the storage closet and returned carrying a metal folding chair. Sorry, Carrie. You got the bad seat. The chair opened with a familiar snap. For a second, the room around me disappeared. Baxter's bowl. My mother lowering my plate. Lindsay laughing. Dad pointing. Your place is over there. Then Moose pushed his nose under my hand and nearly stole a dinner roll. I laughed. A real laugh. No anger hiding underneath it. No, I said, dragging the folding chair toward the table. This one's fine. Ben pointed toward the kitchen. Dog bowl's over there, though. We can move him. Leave him. Moose settled beneath the table. I set my plate down. A year earlier, a folding chair had been my father's way of telling me where I belonged. Now it was metal, plastic, 4 rubber feet, and nothing more. I pulled it closer to the people I wanted beside me, called the dog away from the turkey, and sat down. This time, I chose the table.